What you are about to see was real life. Fauci and Mayor Bowser were knocking on doors like block captains, pushing jabs like they moving weight. If you thought this was about health, you haven't been paying attention. Check this out.
People in America are not settled with the information that's been given to us right now. So I'm not going to be lining up taking a shot or a vaccination for something that wasn't clear in the first place. And then you all create a shot in miraculous time. It takes years to create vaccination.
Well, it used to take years.
Okay, it used to.
You know how many years were invested in this approach? About 20 years of science to get us to be able to do it.
20 years is not enough. And 9 months is definitely not enough for nobody to be taking no vaccination that you all came up with.
The only reason I'm talking to you right now, as close as we are, is that I've been vaccinated.
Right.
But if it allows thousands of people like you don't get vaccinated, you're going to let this virus continue to percolate in this country and in this world.
Something like the common flu then, right?
And not
it's
like
much
the
more
flu.
serious than the flu.
Well, the flu kills a lot of people annually, too.
You know how many people died of the flu the last year? I mean, not this year, virtually none, but the previous year, about 20 to 30,000. You know how many people have died from COVID-19 in the United States? 600,000 Americans.
Well, the number that you all giving that died, that's once again, that's you all's number.
You gonna pass?
Yeah, definitely. Because when you start talking about paying people to get vaccinated, when you start talking about incentivizing things to get people vaccinated, there's something else going on with that. Something else going on.
It is something going on with
something else.
You're right. But I'm glad millions of people like me and most everybody here didn't get an. You know what their incentive was? Protecting their health and protecting the city. But I won't keep you anymore.
It's okay, because my incentive, y'all campaign is about fear. It's about inciting fear in people. You all attack people with fear. That's what this pandemic is. It's a fear. It's fear, this pandemic. That's all it is.
Now you see what it really was. No science involved, just straight up pressure tactics. If you want more, get the Fauci files. Fauci's dirty secrets exposed. Straight truth, no sugarcoat. The link's in the description. And now, here is your pandemic news report.
Today, we're digging into something pretty significant. An executive order signed by then-President Trump.
That's right. It was about funding, specifically cutting off federal money for certain kinds of scientific research.
Yeah, research happening in, specific countries. We've gone through the information out there to really get you the essentials, what the order did, why it matters.
And, if you're interested in how science funding works or these international research links.
Or maybe the risks, right? The potential risks with some biological studies.
Exactly.
This is for you. Our mission here is simple. Cut through the noise, give you the key takeaways on this executive order, and sort of the whole context around it.
So you feel informed, but not, buried in details.
Okay, so let's start with the order itself. What was the main action?
Well, the core idea was stopping U.S. taxpayer money going to gain-of-function research.
Gain-of-function, okay.
Yeah, specifically in countries where the lab safety, the oversight, was seen as inadequate.
And China was mentioned.
China was explicitly named, yes.
Yeah.
The justification given was essentially protecting the American public.
From what?
From potential global health disasters. That was the stated rationale.
Right. Okay, so that brings us to the Wuhan Institute of Virology. There seems to be connection being drawn here in the sources.
There is. The information we looked at suggests a link was made between research funded by the U.S. at that specific lab.
In Wuhan?
And the COVID-19 outbreak.
And this funding, it apparently continued even after some kind of pause in 2014.
That's what the sources allege. Funding from NIH, USAID, it supposedly kept flowing.
How?
Through an intermediary group called EcoHealth Alliance. And it was for research described as, risky virus manipulation.
Wow. Do we know how much money we're talking about?
The figure reported is over $1.4 million U.S. taxpayer funds.
Go to Wuhan.
Yes, between 2014 and 2021.
Okay, that's quite specific.
And it gets more specific. There's mention of something called Project Diffuse.
Diffuse, what was that?
According to the sources, it was a plan, a proposal that was rejected, thankfully.
Rejected, okay.
Yeah, a plan to engineer enhanced coronaviruses. The source material calls it biohazard behavior. Pretty strong language.
Biohazard behavior, yeah, that is strong.
And adding to that picture, there are reports about Peter Daszak, who leads EcoHealth Alliance.
Mm-hmm.
He apparently admitted that China's lab safety standards were, let's say, lower. And he also mentioned the possibility that virus data might still be hidden in Wuhan.
Hidden data. That raises questions about transparency, doesn't it?
Absolutely. Transparency, safety protocols. It paints a concerning picture.
So just to make sure everyone listening understands what exactly is gain-of-function research, let's break that down.
Sure. So essentially, it's research where scientists intentionally modify viruses in a lab.
Modify them how? To do what?
Well, the idea often is to study them better, understand how they might change, how they work. But the sources point out this can sometimes mean making them stronger.
Stronger, like deadlier or more contagious.
Potentially, yes. More lethal, more transmissible. That's the risk inherent in it.
And some experts think this kind of research was actually involved in the start of the pandemic.
That's right. People like Dr. Jay Bhattacharya and even the former CDC head, Dr. Robert Redfield. They're reported as believing this type of research might have played a role.
Okay, so that's one perspective. But there are differing views in science, right?
Oh, definitely. It's a big point of debate. Some argue gain of function is vital, to get ahead of potential outbreaks, to prepare.
Prepare by studying potentially dangerous modifications.
That's the argument. But the information we have contrasts this with, say, past statements attributed to Dr. Fauci.
What did he supposedly say?
The sources say he described it as a risk worth taking, intended to downplay the lab leak idea early on.
But the sources also suggest maybe emails or other things show something different.
Correct. They mention emails and receipts say otherwise. So it points to an evolving situation or perhaps conflicting information.
It highlights that internal debate, about the real risks versus the potential benefits.
Exactly. It's complex.
And it seems these worries about lab safety, they aren't exactly new, are they?
Not at all. That's a key piece of context here. The sources point out warnings about lab leaks go way back.
How far back?
Decades. Even mentioning the Russian flu back in the 1970s as a possible example.
Wow, the 70s.
Yeah. And despite these warnings over the years, the information suggests safety practices maybe didn't keep up.
Didn't keep pace while the research itself got riskier?
That seems to be the implication, that the research evolved, became potentially more hazardous, but the safety measures lag behind.
So if you put that history together with the executive order,
Then you can see Trump's order as kind of a direct reaction, a response to those historical warnings, and maybe a feeling that safety wasn't improving enough.
like using the power of federal funding as leverage.
Precisely. To push the scientific community towards better safety, stricter oversight, especially for this kind of international work.
It wasn't just scientists debating this, though. Other figures weighed in.
Right. The sources mention Health Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr.
What was his take?
Pretty blunt, actually. He's quoted saying, he can't really name a benefit from gain-of-function research.
Not at all.
That's what the quote suggests. But he could clearly see the downside, citing millions of lives lost, and he praised Trump's decision to stop the funding.
That really brings in the public health impact perspective.
And also the national security angle. That comes through clearly, too.
How so?
The argument presented is about stopping funding for risky research in certain countries, particularly nations seen as potential adversaries.
To prevent what? Future problems.
Exactly. To prevent future disasters that might originate from research the U.S. itself helped fund. It's framed as a proactive security measure.
I see. Any other political figures mentioned?
Senator Joni Ernst is quoted. She apparently called the ban a win for common sense.
Common sense, okay.
And she used the term firewall, suggesting this ban could act as a firewall against future pandemics.
So really framing it as a protective barrier for the country.
Yes, protection, national interest, public safety. Those are the key themes in that perspective.
Okay, so let's try and wrap this up for you, the listener. We've gone through this executive order, the one stopping federal funds for gain-of-function work in certain places.
With a big focus on the Wuhan Institute context, the funding trails, EcoHealth Alliance.
Right. And we clarified what gain-of-function research actually is, those modifications to viruses.
We also touched on the history, the warnings about lab safety going back decades.
And looked at the different viewpoints, scientific debates, the security arguments, public health concerns.
It really comes down to this balancing act, doesn't it?
Between what? Science and safety?
Yeah, between pushing scientific frontiers, which we need to do, and managing these potentially huge global risks.
Especially when research crosses borders, international collaboration adds another layer.
It does. This executive order is just one attempt to manage that complex equation.
So, thinking about all this, here's something for you to consider as we finish up. We obviously need science to fight infectious diseases, right?
Absolutely crucial.
But we've seen there are real risks with some research paths, especially internationally. So looking ahead, what do you think are the most critical things we need to weigh up?
You know, when balancing that need for progress against the need for safety, especially in global health research, what factors matter most?
Yeah, what's the right balance for the future? Something to think about.
And now, here is your pandemic news report.